Most people lock their doors to keep wild animals out. But one man locked himself inside a concrete enclosure with 2 full-grown bobcats for 10 straight nights. He called it a social experiment. A concrete box placed inside the cat's habitat, where he could observe their nighttime behavior up close. His wife thought he'd lost his mind. His colleague called it unlikely to end without serious injury. Walt called it science. The 2 resident bobcats, Faith and Eden, just called it an opportunity. What began as a careful study of nocturnal bonding and trust would soon spiral into something no research paper could have predicted. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The morning sun came up over the Sonoran Desert like it had somewhere important to be, flooding the Copper Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary with the kind of clear, golden light that made everything look like a postcard somebody had cranked the saturation up on. Saguaro cacti threw long, purple shadows across the red dirt. A roadrunner, an actual roadrunner, not the cartoon kind, trotted past the front gate with the dignified confidence of someone who owns the place. Somewhere in the distance, a cactus wren was screaming its head off about something, as cactus wrens are obligated by law to do at sunrise. It was, by all objective measures, a beautiful Arizona morning. 72 degrees, 0 clouds. The air smelled like sage and dry earth, and the faint ghost of last night's rain. Dr. Walter Walt Henderson, age 68, recently retired wildlife biologist and 2-time winner of the Pima County Bird Count competition, stood at the gate of Enclosure 7 holding a sleeping bag, a legal pad, a thermos of terrible instant coffee, and an expression that suggested he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. "This," said his wife, Marlene, standing 10 feet behind him with her arms crossed, "is absolutely the most ridiculous thing you have ever done. And you once spent 4 days hiding in a duck blind dressed as a cattail." "That was research," Walt said. "This is also research, apparently." "It is. It's a social experiment." Marlene looked at Enclosure 7. Through the reinforced chain link, she could see 2 pairs of amber eyes watching Walt with the calm, evaluative focus of creatures who have never in their lives experienced self-doubt. Faith and Eden, 2 adult female bobcats, residents of Copper Ridge for 3 and 5 years respectively, neither of them what you would call warm and fuzzy in the traditional sense. "They're going to eat you," Marlene said. "They're not going to eat me. They're going to eat you, and I'm going to have to call Patricia at 6 in the morning." "Patricia's already here. She approved the experiment." Marlene looked over to where Dr. Patricia Bowen, the sanctuary's chief veterinarian, was standing near the equipment shed with a clipboard and an expression of professional neutrality that was doing very little to conceal the fact that she found this deeply amusing. Pat was 51, had a PhD in wildlife medicine, and had worked with enough eccentric volunteers over the years to have developed what she privately called her Walt face, a carefully maintained look of scientific openness that she deployed whenever Walt announced a new theory. "Pat," Marlene called over, "you approve this?" "I said it was unlikely to result in serious injury," Pat replied carefully. "That's not quite the same thing." Walt squared his shoulders. He had spent 35 years as a wildlife biologist. He had radio-tagged grizzly bears. He had waded into alligator territory in the Florida Everglades with nothing but chest waders and misplaced confidence. He had, famously, once crawled into a badger den on a dare at a conference in Tucson, an incident that was still brought up at departmental reunions and involved a level of screaming that he refused to discuss in detail. He could spend 10 nights in a concrete observation box inside a bobcat enclosure. He was a scientist. He had a hypothesis, and his hypothesis was this: bobcats, widely categorized as solitary and asocial animals, likely engaged in more complex social bonding behaviors during nighttime hours than current literature suggested. He intended to observe, document, and publish. What he did not intend, and had not factored into his hypothesis, was Faith. Faith was a 4-year-old female bobcat who had arrived at Copper Ridge as a kitten after being found on the side of Route 10 near Benson, apparently having been clipped by a vehicle. She had survived with a partially healed fracture in her left hind leg that had knitted imperfectly, leaving her with a slight rolling gait that made her look perpetually like she was walking on a boat in mild chop. She also had what Pat diplomatically referred to as a neurological quirk, a mild disorder affecting her muscle coordination and impulse control that, in practical terms, meant Faith sometimes made decisions that were enthusiastic to the point of being inadvisable. She was also, everyone at the sanctuary agreed, absolutely convinced that she was roughly the size of a house cat and that any available warm surface existed for her personal comfort. Eden was different. Eden was 5 years old, sleek and watchful, a study in feline self-possession. She had been confiscated from an illegal exotic pet operation in New Mexico and had spent her first year at Copper Ridge in a state of magnificent disdain before gradually warming, the word was used loosely, to human presence. She tolerated Walt's existence with the air of a duchess tolerating a slightly eccentric but harmless butler. Night 1, Walt climbed into his observation box, a 3-foot by 6-foot concrete shelter with a mesh front that Pat had custom-built for exactly this kind of project. Arranged his sleeping bag, uncapped his terrible coffee, and prepared to observe. Faith observed him back for approximately 40 seconds. Then she walked directly to the box, stuck her entire face through the mesh opening Walt had left for ventilation, sniffed his pillow with the thoroughness of a customs inspector, and decided it was hers. Walt documented this in his legal pad. 2,206 hours. Subject F has expressed interest in the observation station. Repositioning to accommodate. What repositioning to accommodate meant in practice was that Faith had wedged herself through the gap. She was not a large bobcat, another consequence of her early injury. Claimed the pillow and was purring at a volume that Walt described in his notes as unreasonably loud for an animal this size, like a motorcycle with a cold. He spent the rest of night 1 with his head propped against the concrete wall, unable to sleep, listening to Faith dream run. He could tell she was dream running because her paws kept twitching, and she made small, extremely undignified chirping sounds. He wrote in his notes, "Bobcat exhibiting clear REM sleep behavior. Also, my neck hurts. Scientific observation continues." By night 3, they had reached a negotiated arrangement. Walt got the sleeping bag. Faith got the pillow. Eden circulated around the box like a quality control inspector, occasionally pressing her nose to the mesh, occasionally ignoring everything entirely, and once, just once, sitting directly on top of the box for 40 minutes while Walt lay below her, deeply aware that there was an apex predator 12 inches above his head and trying to maintain scientific detachment about this. He was documenting grooming behavior by night 4. Faith, he wrote, was an enthusiastic social groomer. She would lick his arm, his hand, occasionally his knee if it was accessible, in what Pat confirmed was typical bonding behavior. The problem was Faith's neurological quirk. Her jaw control was imprecise. What began as gentle grooming could escalate without warning into what Walt recorded in his notes as a love bite of concerning force, and what he described to Marlene on the phone at 11 at night as, "She nearly took off a chunk of my forearm, Marlene. I'm serious. She looked completely surprised by herself. Come home, Marlene said. I can't come home. I'm in the middle of a social experiment. Walt. She's not doing it on purpose. It's the neurological thing. She doesn't have full control. I just have to watch her. There was a long pause. You are watching a bobcat, Marlene said, so she doesn't accidentally bite through your arm. In a scientific context. Good night, Walt. He let Faith groom his hair, which she preferred to skin. Apparently the texture was more satisfying, and which produced what he described as the single most bizarre sensation I have experienced in 35 years of fieldwork, including the badger incident. Eden occasionally joined in, always with more precision and less enthusiasm, like a professional hairstylist following up after an amateur. Walt sat very still during these sessions, documenting and trying not to think too hard about the fact that he was having his head groomed by two bobcats in a concrete box in the Arizona desert at midnight. He thought about it a little bit. It was hard not to. By night 6, the grooming sessions had become routine enough that he stopped writing about them and started writing about sleep patterns instead. Specifically, he was writing about Faith's heart. It started because of the pillow, or rather, because of the loss of the pillow. Faith had, by this point, fully and permanently claimed it. Walt had stopped even attempting to contest this, and so his head rested instead against her torso. It was not, he wrote, an uncomfortable position, exactly. She was warm. She was purring. She was, he noted with scientific precision, extremely soft for a wild animal with what he estimated was 25% attitude to body weight ratio. But what he noticed, lying there in the dark with his ear against her ribcage, was her heartbeat. Subject F. Heartbeat is audible and distinctive, he wrote. Rate appears to fluctuate with respiratory cycle. Faster on inhalation, slower on exhalation. Not dramatic variation, maybe 15 to 20 beats per minute difference. Working theory. Accelerated rate on inhalation helps push oxygenated blood to muscle groups during elevated metabolic demand. Slower rate on exhalation may allow more complete CO2 expulsion from vascular system. Untested. Will flag for Pat. He lay there for a long time, listening. Faith twitched, dream ran, shifted, relocated her back leg onto his shoulder in a way that was probably accidental and definitely uncomfortable, purred loudly, and briefly gnawed on the sleeping bag before losing interest. It was a genuinely terrible environment for sleep. Walt had not slept more than 4 consecutive hours in 6 nights. His lower back was making alarming sounds. He had developed what he privately termed bobcat lag, a state of exhausted bewilderment that felt superficially similar to jet lag, but with more fur in his face. But he kept listening to her heart. It was rhythmic in the way hearts are rhythmic, but with that variation, that breath-linked fluctuation, faster and slower, faster and slower. And there was something about it, lying there in the dark desert quiet, that he found unexpectedly difficult to look away from, or rather, to stop listening to. He wrote in his notes, "There is something remarkable about lying close enough to another creature to hear its heart. Not a metaphor. Literally remarkable. Note to self, consider whether remarkable is appropriate scientific terminology. Probably not. Keep it in anyway." He fell asleep at 2:17 a.m., ear against Faith's ribs, listening to her breathe. He woke up because Pat was outside the enclosure at 6 a.m. with a coffee thermos that was, blessedly, not instant, and she was saying his name in a tone that he associated with incoming information he wasn't going to like. "Walt, wake up. I need to talk to you about something." He extracted himself from the sleeping bag, which was significantly more complicated than it should have been because Faith had tucked herself partially underneath it and was not interested in moving. He made it out of the box, got the coffee, and looked at Pat. She had a different expression than her Walt face. This was her actual professional face, focused, careful, and containing something he couldn't quite read. "I was reviewing your notes from last night," she said. "The ones you sent me at 2 a.m.? I told you I'd send them as I wrote them." "You did, and I appreciate that. Walt," she paused. "The heart rate variation you described, the respiratory sinus arrhythmia. It's just a theory. I know it's not—" "No, the theory is actually pretty solid. We see RSA in mammals across the board. That's not what I want to talk about." She looked at him steadily. "I went in and did a wellness check on Faith this morning while you were asleep, and I ran a cardiac assessment. A thorough one." Walt set down his coffee. "And?" "Faith has a structural abnormality I hadn't detected before. Minor. A slight irregularity in her mitral valve. It's not dangerous, or at least it doesn't appear to be at this stage. But it explains the more pronounced RSA you were hearing. Her heart is working a little differently than it should. Compensating." Pat tilted her head. "If you hadn't been lying against her for 6 nights listening, we likely wouldn't have caught this for another year or 2, at which point it could have become a real problem." Walt stared at her. "You found a heart condition," he said, "because I was using a Bobcat as a pillow." "You found a heart condition," Pat corrected gently. "You were the one listening." He looked back at enclosure 7, where Faith was now awake and sitting at the mesh, watching him with her amber eyes. Her slightly lopsided gait made her look always like she was considering a decision. Like she was about to do something that would surprise everyone, including herself. She blinked at him slowly. He blinked back, because Pat had told him long ago that slow blinking was a non-threatening signal, and he had been doing it every day for 6 nights, and he was not going to stop now. "She's going to be okay?" he asked. "We'll monitor closely, adjust her exercise regimen, possibly some medication down the line. But yeah," Pat nodded. "She's going to be okay, because you were paying attention." Walt picked up his coffee. He stood there in the early morning light, bright, clear, the sky the particular shade of blue that only shows up over the desert at altitude. And he was quiet for a moment. "I should put in my notes," he said finally, "that the experiment had an unexpected secondary outcome." "Put whatever you like in your notes," Pat said, and she was smiling now, a real smile, not the Walt face. "You've earned it." The plot twist, the real one, the one Walt did not put in his notes because some things are not for academic journals, came on night 9. It was late. Faith was asleep against him again, his ear to her ribs, and he was listening to her heart do its characteristic fluctuation. Faster, slower. In with the breath, out with the breath. He had, by this point, become so attuned to it that he could track the rhythm without consciously trying. The way you eventually stop noticing the sound of rain on a roof and just feel it in the background of everything. And then he noticed something, his own heart. He lay very still, attention split between the heartbeat in Faith's chest and the one in his own. And what he noticed, what surprised him so completely that he stopped breathing for a full 3 seconds, was that they were synchronized. Not perfectly, not exactly, but close. Close enough that the fluctuations were mirroring each other, his inhalation and hers, his heart rate rising and falling in a rhythm that had, somewhere over 9 nights, begun to match hers. He was so startled that he sat up, which woke Faith, who made an extraordinarily undignified noise, a sort of disgruntled chirp grunt, and relocated herself to the pillow with pointed resentment, glaring at him over her shoulder. "Sorry," he whispered. "Sorry. Go back to sleep." She did. He lay back down, and this time he placed one hand over his own chest and kept his ear against her ribs, and he listened to both of them. There it was, the same rhythm, breathing together in the dark. He didn't write this in his notes. He thought about it for a long time. He thought about the 35 years of fieldwork, the radio-tagged bears, the alligator territory, the badger incident. He thought about the way scientists are trained to observe from a distance, to measure and document and categorize, to resist the pull toward what Pat called anthropomorphism, and what Walt had always privately thought of as just noticing that things are alive. He thought about his daughter, Jenny, who was 34 and lived in Flagstaff and called him every Sunday and always ended the call with, "I love you, Dad," and how he always said, "Yep, okay, drive safe," because he had never quite learned how to say it back out loud, which was one of the things he'd been meaning to work on since retirement. He thought about Marlene, who had stood at that gate on the first morning with her arms crossed, being sensible and practical. And also, he knew perfectly well, very quietly terrified that something would happen to him, and who had called every single night to check in, and who had brought him actual good food twice because she knew his instant coffee was catastrophic. Faith's heart beat under his ear, his beat in his chest. Together, without meaning to, without trying, without science. He thought, there is something remarkable about lying close enough to another creature to hear its heart. He had written that 6 nights ago as a dry note about animal physiology. He understood now that he had not actually known what he was writing. On night 10, the last night, Walt called Jenny from inside the observation box at 11 p.m. with Faith asleep on the pillow 18 inches from his face, and Eden sitting on top of the box like a gargoyle with opinions. "Dad?" Jenny's voice was surprised. "You okay? You never call." "I'm fine, I'm in the Bobcat box." "Right, of course you are. What's going on?" "Nothing's going on," Walt said. "I just wanted to call, tell you something." "Okay?" "I love you," he said. "I should say that more. I'm going to say it more." There was a long pause. Then Jenny said, very quietly, "I love you too, Dad." "Good," he said. "Good. Okay. I'm going to go listen to a bobcat breathe." He hung up and lay back down. Faith twitched in her sleep, paws cycling through some dream hunt in the desert dark, and made the little chirping sound she always made when she was chasing something invisible. He put his ear against her side. The heart was there, faithful and strange, speeding and slowing with each breath. Remarkable. He listened until he fell asleep. Marlene was waiting in the parking lot the next morning with a thermos of actual good coffee, a breakfast burrito from the place on Speedway he liked, and no, "I told you so." She just handed him the burrito and looked at his face. "You look terrible," she said. "I know." Was it worth it? He thought about Faith's heartbeat in the dark, about the mitral valve they'd found in time, about his own heart, stubbornly syncing up with a wild animal's as if his body had decided, without consulting his brain, that connection was not optional. "Yeah," he said, "it was." She linked her arm through his, and they walked back toward the enclosure together in the wide, warm light of the Arizona morning. And through the fence, Faith was watching them with her amber eyes, blinking slowly, regal and ridiculous and alive. He blinked back. Note appended to official research documentation, in handwriting considerably messier than the rest of the document. At the bottom of page 47, do not, under any circumstances, use a live bobcat as a pillow. The quality of sleep is abysmal. You will be twitched on, purr-deafened, intermittently groomed against your will, and you will spend significant portions of the night attempting to avoid being accidentally bitten by an animal who seems genuinely shocked every time it happens. Your back will not recover for at least a week. Your pillow will be stolen on day one, and you will not get it back. That said, pay attention to what you can hear when you get close enough to listen. You might find something nobody expected, including yourself.